The year is 2010. 4Kids' decision to continue adapting their popular One Piece property has paid off, with a successful venture into merchandise, including video games and a trading card game. They've just wrapped up the Enies Lobby arc, but they've got their work cut out for them as they begin thinking about how to adapt some of the more modern material in the series. In this fictional timeline, I have been hired as the director of the 4Kids One Piece adaptation, which I call 4Piece. That means I get to make the creative decisions about the censorship and alterations that are necessary to make One Piece suitable to 4Kids' younger English-speaking audiences. Last time, I picked up where 4Kids left off, adapting the Skypiea through Enies Lobby arcs, and now I will pick up again to adapt Thriller Bark all the way through Marineford into the time skip. This particular block of content presents many interesting challenges for our fictional adaptation, and I'll have some things to say about its feasibility in just a few minutes. But first, I need to comment on something else. Holy moly, I did not expect this sort of reaction out of my first YouTube video. I am truly thankful that I could entertain so many people with my thoughts and ideas. It seems like I was right in assuming that there was a crowd out there who hold the 4Kids dub in a fond light, and many who have been waiting to see an analysis like this done or have been speculating themselves. In the same vein, I expected much more pushback on my ideas than I ended up receiving, but it appears that lots of you are happy to play along with my imaginary scenario and ended up having a lot of fun with it. There were some of the more negative comments that I expected, but I think the majority comprehended my desire to discuss the dub in earnest. For real, thank you everyone who watched and supported the video and left a comment. I've had a lot of fun reading them and interacting with people. Speaking of the comments, plenty of you provided your ideas for both past and future dub content, which is exactly what I wanted. I was thrilled with the idea that this would be a more collaborative process than just me throwing ideas at the wall. In the same way, I know I was bound to make some mistakes or overlook some things in my last video, and I'm grateful to the people who brought some additional info and pointed them out to me, which is why the first part of this video will be dedicated to correcting my errata from last time, and I'll be sure to credit the commenters on screen who brought them to my attention. The biggest thing I overlooked, which lots of people commented on, is that in the previous video, I asserted that the creators of the One Piece CCG explicitly made Dory and Bragi ogres instead of giants. Well, the red and blue ogre are in fact Dory and Bragi's epithets, respectively, essentially their nicknames. I've even been reading Elbaf in the manga, so I'm not sure how I failed to connect that detail. That means that 4Kids apparently did better research than I did, at least with translating the card game. This isn't an error per se, but this commenter made me aware that the feminist Sanji card could be translated from the original Japanese to mean something similar to a chivalrous man or a white knight, which honestly enhances the humor that 4Kids decided to call him a feminist. I made a few errors in my naming convention surrounding Skypiea. While I looked into the One Piece Pirates Carnival game to find Gravity Blue Riders and Eneru's vassals, I overlooked that this game also already gave Eneru a new title as the Sky Lord instead of Kami, which I called him in my video. But there are also many other new voiced characters in this game, including Blackbeard, who I proposed giving a hammed-up piratey accent, but since this game is 4-piece canon, I would use all the voice actors who appeared in it for new characters, including Teach, whose performance I find pretty darn good. In the same vein, my proposed changes to the arc Maxim are moot since Pirates Carnival already changed the name to just Maxim. Some commenters informed me before their closure and bankruptcy, 4Kids opened a branch called Foresight, where they intended to create uncut dubs for the show's original audiences, which some assume could have included One Piece. I was also informed that 4Kids at least began working on dubbing Skypiea and even Little Garden before they closed, some remnants of which can be found on YouTube. I will link to one such video in the description. Doesn't directly pertain to this video, I just wanted to mention it. Still on the topic of names, I incorrectly noted that in 4-piece, Gum Gum Pistol was changed to Gum Gum Rocket, whereas actually Gum Gum Pistol was renamed to Gum Gum Blast. I believe Gum Gum Rocket actually replaced Gum Gum Rifle in this dub. This matters somewhat because in Enies Lobby, I proposed changing Gum Gum Jet Pistol to Gum Gum Rush Rocket, which wouldn't line up correctly since I got the adapted name wrong. I initially made this change mostly because I felt that Gum Gum Jet Rocket didn't sound right to me. However, as I was watching through Thriller Bark, I realized that Luffy already has a newer attack called Gum Gum Jet Rocket, which I still think sounds weird, but it's a moot point now. That being said, I think it was unnecessary for me to change Jet to Rush in the first place, so I will revoke this decision. I also think that Gum Gum Jet Blast sounds pretty cool. Another change I made in Eni's lobby relates to the Rokushiki finger pistol attack, which I renamed to Finger Shock. Well, these commenters pointed out that my description of the attack doesn't explain why Luffy is immune to it initially, and that it essentially gives Lucci internally mission hockey, which is accurate and pretty funny. It's true that I didn't explain why Luffy would be immune to the attack and why he would suddenly be affected when Lucci was in his leopard form, but that isn't really what I intended, and I think this confusion mainly comes down to my poor choice of words, particularly calling my changed attack a shockwave. What I was more so going for was something akin to Kill Bill's 5-point palm exploding heart technique, or that thing some phony martial arts teachers do where they touch some pressure point and send a student flailing out of control. So let me re-explain my idea for Finger Shock more accurately. Finger Shock is an attack that targets a foe's pressure point to momentarily paralyze them and deal damage to their nervous system. We can explain that Luffy is initially immune to Finger Shock because, as a rubber man, his nerves and blood vessels are also stretchy, so instead of being crushed by the Rokushiki user's finger, his nerves just bend out of the way of the attack. However, it has already been established that while Luffy is immune to most blunt attacks, he doesn't resist sharp or pointy attacks, so when Lucci goes into his leopard form, his claws pin down Luffy's nerves so he can be hit by the attack. That should do it for my mistakes, but I wanted to comment on one matter a few commenters respectfully brought up, which is that I called or pronounced certain names in an unusual way. I thought this was clear in my prior video, but I chose to call most things by their 4Kids adapted names, such as Eneru, Zolo, and Roguetown, since that's the way they would be said in my hypothetical adapted version. In cases where I adapted future content, I chose to pronounce names as I expected 4Kids would have. While I did this purposefully, it actually goes deeper than that, since, at least for the 3 examples I just gave, the official English One Piece manga by Viz Media also translates them the same. The current manga calls Zoro Zolo to this very day. Don't get me started on Roguetown, since I have some strong thoughts about that, but I digress. So yeah, that does it for correcting errors in the last video, although many of you considered it a mistake that I skipped the G8 arc since it was filler. Though this filler arc seems to be more popular than some canon arcs among some people, if the comment section is anything to go by. There were also a fair number of people who wanted me to adapt Little Garden and the Twin Capes, so at some point in the future, I will plan to include an adaptation of the previously skipped arcs as well as G8, but my current plan is to finish out future content before doubling back. Lastly, before we get started, I was really pleased to see so many great suggestions for adapting future story material. Since I already had a lot of my anticipated changes planned, I ended up not using a lot of suggestions for this video, but in a future one, I'll make it a point to include commenter suggestions into my story changes, so keep giving them to me. Whew, okay, well, hopefully the intro wasn't too long. With all that out of the way, let's get to the actual point of the video. The next arc on the list is... I've been made aware that some fans don't like Thriller Bark. Like, how? I guess everyone must have a least favorite arc, but I see Thriller Bark in people's top 3 worst arcs list along Fishman Island and Skypiea, both of which I also don't believe should hold those spots, but I digress again. I really appreciate Thriller Bark for the change of scenery, interesting characters, and how it contributes to certain character arcs. But anyway, in our adaptation, Thriller Bark will be the place where we address the other major plot hole created by the omission of the Twin Capes arc in 4Kids, which is that the Straw Hats' interactions with Laboon was a contributing factor that made Brook decide to join their crew. Obviously, we'll have to write around this, but that will come much later in the arc. To start us off, the arc begins after the Straw Hats find a barrel floating in the sea, which to Robin appears to be an offering that sailors sometimes leave in order to appease some sea gods for safe travel or something. To remove the religious connotation, all we need to do is frame it as a superstition instead of a religious practice. When it comes to the general theme and imagery of Thriller Bark, some in the last video's comments wondered how I would tackle it, but I determined not a whole lot will actually need to change on that front. I alluded to this in the prior video, and I honestly wasn't very clear about what I was trying to say there, so let me reiterate. Things like skulls and skeletons aren't a cultural taboo in the West like they are in some countries, like China for example. Halloween is a major holiday for a lot of people in the West, and it isn't uncommon in the slightest to see houses decorated with zombies and skeletons or even fake gore. Given that Halloween is primarily a holiday for younger kids, the general content of Thriller Bark doesn't seem very objectionable at all. I mean, The Nightmare Before Christmas came out more than a decade before 4Kids started airing One Piece, and Scooby-Doo in its many iterations has been a popular kids show even before that. For a more modern example, think of something like Hotel Transylvania. All of these contain imagery similar to Thriller Bark and are marketed for kids, so I don't think there are any general problems with it here. although some of the specific instances of zombie creation might need some changes down the line. We'll get to it in a minute. When it comes to Brook, I genuinely think nothing needs to change with his appearance, although his original backstory that he tells the Straw Hats will have some edits. In the original, Brook explains that his crew suffered a defeat on the Grand Line where there were no survivors, although he eventually returned to his skeleton body because of his devil fruit power. In our version, we should leave the fate of Brook's crew somewhat ambiguous, stating something like, "We eventually met our match on the Grand Line when another crew took us out." We will also not show the scenes of Brook's crew dead and bloody on the deck of their ship. You may also know that Brook has a particular habit when he meets women. Instead of asking to see their underwear, Brook will instead ask them for a kiss, which I think would prompt a similar reaction to what is on screen, especially since he's a skeleton.
Hey, wait! Do skeletons poop?
I love Usopp's outfit on Thriller Bark. He's like a crappy version of how Professor Van Helsing is portrayed in a lot of media. That said, both he and Chopper carry and brandish crosses in various portions throughout the arc, which need to be edited out. Making them instead hold something like a candle would be cool, but we're also going for practicability here, and it would be pretty onerous to edit something like a flickering candle throughout the arc. I'd rather make it a static object, so my ideas are to either make Usopp hold a wooden stake, like the kind you'd drive into a vampire's heart, or a pendant of a four-leaf clover. Not exactly ghost hunting gear, but it fits the general theme of stuff you'd carry if you were superstitious and wanted to protect yourself. Chopper also wears a cross necklace throughout the arc. I think it would be easiest and best to just remove the cross and also replace it with a small four-leaf clover. The next necessary omission is the sequence where Nami gets attacked in the bath by Absalom. We pretty much can't show any of this, but we can still salvage some of the footage of Usopp and Chopper out in front of the door. The general conversation can stay the same, but we'll edit Nami's silhouette off of the door in any frames where it's shown, and end the scene before Absalom's attack starts. The next scene will feature the other Straw Hat group on the island as normal, but then when we cut back to these three, we'll go straight into the scene where the three of them are walking down the hallway, where the following dialogue will be heard. Usopp: "Listen, Nami, invisible men don't exist. I'm sure you must have imagined it." Nami: "I'm not. Someone really was there." Usopp: "Don't say that. It probably was all the spooky scenery getting to your head." Nami: "I'm telling you, I bumped into something when I came back into the hallway, and maybe nothing would have happened if you two hadn't left me alone." Usopp: "Well, you were taking forever in the bath. Chopper and I had to use the bathroom." Nami: "You couldn't have waited until I was finished?" Usopp: "I already said I was sorry. What do you want me to do? You're perfectly fine. Nothing happened." Nami: "Sorry isn't gonna cut it. Besides, whoever it was probably overheard our conversation. If they did, we could be in some real danger here." The rest can be pretty much the same from there. So we imply that Nami encountered Absalom off-screen and maintain continuity of Absalom reporting what Usopp, Nami, and Chopper had found out when talking to Hogback later in the forest. Next, we need to address Perona's cursed fruit powers. In the original, her negative hollows debilitate foes by making them depressed and lose the will to do anything. I don't think we want to bring depression into 4Kids, so we'll have to change this slightly. We could, of course, just have the ghost make people really sad, but then Usopp overcoming the power by being a naturally sad person is still just a little too bleak for 4Kids, possibly. So I propose this change. Perona's ghost attack will be renamed Homeward Hollow. Instead of the ghosts chanting negative, they'll say stay away, and their effects will change from making someone depressed to making them homesick, to a comical degree. We'll of course have to change all the dialogue associated with this as well. When Frankie gets hit with it for the first time, he'll say, "This place is too much. I want to go back to Water 7. I miss the Frankie family." Luffy will say, "I don't want to be Pirate King anymore. I want to go home and eat a big meal. Let's go back to the ship." Zoro says, "I miss the dojo. Take me back to the East Blue." Or something along those lines. That being the case, you may be wondering how I'll handle Usopp being resistant to the attack. I'll get to that when it's time for the Perona fight. There's a large number of coffins shown across the whole arc, most of which depict a cross on them, which we will simply edit out. Finally, we come to Chopper's initial confrontation with Hogback in the laboratory. We'll use this opportunity to expand on how Hogback makes the zombies, which will be slightly changed in our version. Instead of being real human corpses, prior to this, we'll have the Straw Hats comment on how the zombies look sort of realistic, but there's something off about them, like they aren't even real. Then, in the present scene, Hogback will divulge that Moria needs him to create realistic puppets for his shadows to inhabit, since shadows can't inhabit something that doesn't have a human form. I'm making this change because, while I don't think zombies as a concept are objectionable in kids' media, drawing attention to the fact that they're actual dead humans could be, especially in the case of Sindri's backstory, where it shows Hogback digging up Victoria's corpse. Although in this case, we'll have Hogback's explanation be somewhat vague. He'll say something like, "Don't my puppets look realistic? Where do I get all the materials from? Well, that's a secret." So that leaves the door open for attentive viewers to surmise that he still could be using real body parts, but I think skirts around the issue of using dead bodies enough that TV networks would be okay with it. This also means that we really don't have to censor the zombies themselves at all, even when they remove their heads and stuff, since we communicate that they're just puppets. As an additional small edit in this section, we'll skip the scene of this guy planning to put the wedding dress on Nami, since it's creepy and not really too important. There's a sizable chunk of the arc that won't really require any changes, but we now come to the first callback to Laboon. When the Straw Hats are regrouping on the ship, Frankie tells them what Brooke told him and Robin after they defeated the spider zombie, about how he and his crew left a whale friend named Laboon behind near the Twin Capes at Reverse Mountain. Obviously, we never saw Laboon in 4Kids, so what are we going to do about this? Well, I'm going to play you what directly precedes the iceberg scene from 4-Piece episode 44. I want you to take a close listen to this reverse mountain sequence as it appears in 4-Piece.
Nami, did you hear that noise?
Huh? Say what?
Did you hear a strange sound?
It's probably just the wind. Remember, we're still at a high altitude.
What's that?
Did you catch it? In the original 4-Piece, you still hear Laboon's whale calls. The Straw Hats brush it off as a trick of the wind, just like in the original, but since they changed Laboon into an iceberg, they just left it at that and the noise was an unresolved point. Likely left in because it made for an ominous entrance to the Grand Line, and because it could be explained as just a distorted wind effect. However, they didn't put in a more windy sounding effect. It's the same sound effect that's used in the original unedited series. This detail is what will provide us an out of this plot hole. As Frankie tells the story, in the original, they show a flashback to Laboon at the Twin Capes. In our version, this flashback will instead show a portion of the clip I just showed you. Then, the 4-Piece Straw Hats will put the pieces together. A whale at the bottom of Reverse Mountain? That noise they heard. It must have been a whale. The sound is unmistakable in hindsight. The whale was calling out to them to warn them about the iceberg in their path. The whale didn't show itself to them, it just acted as a friendly guardian to help them get down the mountain safely. They can't be sure, but it makes sense that it was the same whale Brooke was talking about. So, that is my solution. If it sounds goofy as hell, just know that the best alternative would be to either try and skirt around the idea of Laboon entirely, or to make a looser connection with Luffy by just saying something like, "I'm sure your friend's out there still, we'll be going back there eventually, so come with us." Instead, my solution forms a more direct connection to Laboon, which, while weaker than the original, at least maintains a certain level of continuity with the original, and utilizes material from 4-Piece specifically to solve its own problem that it created. I'll have more to say about it when we get to the end of the arc. So then, now we come to the Perona fight. An interesting detail from this fight I never noticed is that, unlike Frankie, Sanji, and Usopp, Zoro doesn't turn to run from the confrontation with Perona, even though he knows one hit from her ghost will essentially put him out of commission. I assume this coincides with Zoro's belief that wounds on the back are a swordsman's shame, and even though the ghosts don't do bodily harm, he refuses to even run from a fight. Not related, just a detail I never noticed before. Anyway, the 4 Straw Hats get hit by Homeward Hollow and give exclamations similar to before, though now Sanji has been hit by it for the first time, he'll say something like, "I never should have left Zeph and the cooks," and Usopp will only say, "I miss Kaya." Since Perona's attack in my version makes people homesick instead of depressed, how do I figure Usopp would be resistant to it? After all, he isn't any less tied down to his home village than anyone else on the crew. Well, I picture it going something like this. Usopp: "Rapid Salt Star. Lucky for me, it looks like I have the natural counter to your powers." Perona: "Darn it, he pretended to get hit for a surprise attack. Well, I won't be so careless this time. Homeward Hollow." Usopp: "Your attack works through hypnosis, right? The ghost plants a lie inside you, then makes you believe it." Perona: "What? Why isn't my attack working on you? It clearly hit you, how are you countering it?" Usopp: "I didn't do anything to counter it. I already lie to myself all the time." Then, instead of the puppets and Perona chanting, "Hang in there," they'll say, "Believe in yourself." So, although the nature of the attack changed, I found a way to still have one of Usopp's core personality traits be the reason he resists Perona's ghosts. Namely, he's a notorious liar. Not only that, but he makes up stories about himself constantly, not only to seem impressive to others, but also as a sort of coping mechanism for his general lack of confidence. I think that still shines through in my version. The rest of the Perona fight should be fine with a few small edits. Firstly, Perona has cross motifs on some places in her room, so we'll just remove those. Additionally, and maybe this is an unnecessary nitpick, but in a reasonably short time, we are introduced to 3 characters whose names all start with Kuma. There was Kumadori from Eni's Lobby, and in Thriller Bark we have Perona's bear doll Kumasi, and then of course Kuma the Warlord. I don't think anyone is at risk of mixing up these 3 characters, but for some verbal variety, I think we should change the name of Perona's bear, maybe to something like Barrington. Next up is the Sanji vs. Absalom confrontation. To censor the machine guns that Absalom carries invisibly in his sleeves, we'll change the color and call them flamethrowers instead, since it visually looks like flames he's shooting most of the time. As for Sanji, this confrontation partially revolves around Sanji being mad at Absalom for, quote-unquote, stealing the clear fruit from him, since it had been Sanji's dream to eat it for a long time. We can't have Sanji talk about peeping on girls! So instead, his intrusive thoughts when talking about what he would have done with the clear fruit powers will be more innocent stuff, like cutting in lines and eavesdropping and getting out of awkward conversations, and maybe some other kind of selfish stuff that isn't really that bad. We can still have everyone react to him by stating that he wanted the fruit for selfish reasons, not just doing good. Basically, the context is the exact same, we just replace the voyeurism with more innocent stuff. Also, this isn't a change, but Sanji's "I now pronounce you man and wall" sounds like a line straight out of 4Kids already.
I now pronounce you man and wall.
We're getting close to the end of the arc now. Next, we need to cut significant parts of Hogback's flashback to remove him digging up Sindri's grave. In dialogue, we will imply that Hogback basically created a doll of Sindri since he knew his desire for her would never be reciprocated. That being the case, coupled with the other changes we made to the nature of the zombies, Chopper's beef with Hogback also needs to be changed. In the original, Chopper is disgusted with how Hogback views the concept of life, stating that the zombies make a mockery of real life. That will remain similar, but instead, in our version, Chopper will view the puppets as a mockery of life, since Hogback traded healing real patients to creating fake creatures to serve his own desires. In the final part of this confrontation, Hogback says that once he has control of Chopper and Robin, he would command them to jump off the tower. Chopper and Robin then trick the Zoro and Sanji zombies into thinking Hogback was commanding them to jump from the tower, which they do. Instead, in our version, Hogback will just command them to get out of here, because they annoy him. Everything on screen can remain the same, and will just be treated more like a Looney Tunes-esque sequence where the 2 zombies aren't implied to be killed after the fall. There's another sizable chunk after this that won't really require any changes. I don't think anything in the Oars or Moria fights is too violent or offensive, except the part where Oars' spine snaps, which is a little visceral, so we'll just take those sequences out and everything else can stay the same. When Kuma does arrive, we'll need to remove the text from his Bible, but honestly nothing else with him really needs to change either, including Sanji, Zoro, and the nothing happened moment, except for removing all the blood. Finally, we come to the end of Thriller Bark, where Brook's backstory is shown through flashbacks, and Luffy asks him again to join the crew. To go along with this, Binks' sake, or Binks' brew, will be changed to Binks' juice. Yeah, count the number of times I've said juice in this project. I was thinking about writing my own version of the song, but I didn't want to keep delaying this video, so you can invent your own if you want. We can reiterate here how the Straw Hats did encounter Laboon in passing, and although they didn't actually see him, evidence that he was there at the bottom of Reverse Mountain is unmistakable. In Brook's backstory, we will be changing the name of the Rumbar Pirates to the Rhubarb Pirates in order to remove the reference to an alcoholic beverage. The crew's journey to the Grand Line and leaving Laboon behind can stay the same, but the ending where the whole crew dies needs to be censored, since watching a bunch of people drop dead is something that won't fly at 4Kids. We can keep Captain Yorkie getting sick and having to leave, but the rest following this is a problem. When it comes to the final performance of the Rumbar Pirates, I think we need to recontextualize the situation they're in. Instead of just being beaten by a rival crew and slowly dying from poison, we'll have to do a lot of work editing out the blood and all the weapons to make it look like everyone is just passed out. We'll change the dialogue to make it so that their ship got raided of all its supplies, so the crew is hungry and exhausted. We'll also edit out anyone who doesn't get back up in the scene so that it doesn't look like anyone is actually dead yet. Lastly, we will cut out the very end of the flashback where people start dropping and supplement it with more shots of just Brook playing or people in Thriller Bark dancing. So the fact that the rest of Brook's crew died isn't explicitly stated, though it is implied by the fact that he's the only one still there. Leaving this up to the audience to form their own conclusion about what happened to the crew, I think is just good enough to pass 4Kids guidelines and my own rules. Also, since we don't want to directly reference the crew's deaths, we will be removing the whole ending section where Brook creates a memorial for them. Whew, Thriller Bark needed a lot more changes than I thought initially, but that brings us to the end of this arc. And what? They brought Foxy back again for another filler arc? Man, Toei must love this guy. Did Foxy make the top 10 in some sort of popularity poll or something around this time? Honestly, I don't blame them. You can put me on the short list of people who want Foxy to return in the manga, but I'm sick of seeing him in all this filler. We're skipping it, as usual. With the first arc of this video down, we need to talk about everything that follows. Now, let's be realistic. If 4Kids did retain One Piece after Alabasta, they could have gotten pretty far. I'm not kidding. I don't think anything I've proposed in these videos would be too much of a stretch for them to implement, and nothing so far content-wise is so egregious that they would find it impossible to adapt. That sentiment of mine comes almost to a hard stop when the Straw Hats hit Sabody for the first time. While I may have downplayed the absurd problems 4Kids would have adapting this arc in the last video, a refresher of everything that happens here shone some light in my eyes. When it comes to a topic like slavery, there's really no tactful way to handle adapting it without being true to the source material. Any attempt at downplaying its significance, especially to a Western audience, you'd run the risk of either seeming insensitive for making it seem not as bad as it is, especially in the context of the very goofy and generally lighthearted 4Kids dub, or you'd risk not going far enough and showing content that's potentially too visceral for a young audience. I think given this choice, 4Kids would have had to end their run here no matter what they chose to do. It's a lose-lose situation. Those are my genuine feelings about it. That being said, while I feel this part would realistically have been a hard stop for 4Kids, I will be doing my best to interpret this arc in their style anyway, both for completeness' sake and because I did come up with a lot of ideas for this arc, but keep in mind what I said previously. So while I will be adapting Sabody, just know that my goal isn't to take the piss out of it. So here we go. This arc begins with maybe one of the funniest moments I've seen in the manga, which is Duval looking like Sanji's bad wanted poster. Sadly, I have nothing else to say about the Flying Fish Riders, since there's not really any changes necessary. However, before we get to Sabody, Kami and Papagu show up, which is where we are introduced to the concept of slavery at Sabody for the first time. In my version, Papagu will explain it like this. The Celestial Dragons are cruel tyrants who throw people in prison just for inconveniencing them. They drag those same prisoners around to act as their servants. When we finally arrive, to set up for a future change, we will alter the dialogue when Luffy asks Hachi why he's wearing a bandage. In the original, Hachan brushes off Luffy's question and talks about something else, but for a future plot moment to work in our version, Luffy will need to have some foreknowledge of the tattoos and what they mean. This moment comes off the heels of Hachi telling the Straw Hats about how dangerous Sabody is compared to where they've been before. My version will also go on a little longer than the original, so we'll have to recycle some footage to make it long enough. Luffy. Hey, what's with that bandage on your head? Did you get hurt? Hachi. Huh? Oh, this. You should know about that too. Well, you might remember that everyone on Arlong's crew had a tattoo like this. Luffy. Right, I thought that was your Jolly Roger. Hachi. Well, sort of, but it's covering up a different tattoo. Some years ago, the Navy gave certain criminals a red tattoo to show that they were particularly dangerous. They don't do that anymore, but if someone saw my tattoo, it would paint a target on my back for the Navy and bounty hunters here, so I've got to keep it hidden no matter what. I'll be in danger if anyone sees it in public. The next scene that really brings what's going on in Sabody Archepelago to the forefront is the part where the runaway pirate with the exploding collar grabs a woman and starts begging people to help him. The scene goes on for a while, so we'll shorten it slightly for brevity, while also editing the script. Changing the context to be a little less harrowing is necessary here, I think. So instead of begging for someone to free him from his bondage, the pirate will say stuff like, "Let me go, I don't want to be a pirate anymore, I promise I'll be good from now on. See, look how nice I can be. Hey lady, you have pretty hair." This will coincide with a greater change I'm making to the context of Sabody. As I noted before, we can't have slavery as the main theme of this arc in 4-piece. Some people gave suggestions about possibly removing the chains or changing them to ropes or something like that, but take a second to think about how the captives are portrayed. It wouldn't be a stretch to turn them into regular convicts. That way, in this first scene, Hachi can explain that the Celestial Dragons use their influence to take prisoners out of prison and make them do menial labor. That way, we don't have all the baggage of the original portrayal. You might ask, well, isn't that sort of the same thing? And yes, it is sort of the same thing, but we can make it a lot more tame if we eliminate or change much of the content, such as the auction house, but we'll get to that in a minute. We've seen people captured by their marines before, or at least there have been allusions to it, so this won't be too much different than that. Soon after this, we get introduced to some of the other supernovas. We'll remove parts of the scenes with Bonnie, the sections that focus on some parts of her a little too much. We'll also be giving Kid an Irish accent for no other reason than he has red hair, and I think it would be funny. Capone will also get a hammed up classic gangster accent, and We'll have Killer sound a little like a bad Darth Vader impression. Oh, maybe Killer's name wouldn't really fly either, so let's just call him John. Just kidding. I would switch to calling him Kira instead. Kira is pronounced the same way as Killer in Japanese, so it would be both a reference to the original name as well as a reference to other characters that bear that name, such as in Death Note or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The next important scene is when St. Charlos comes through and knocks the injured person off the stretcher. In the original, he ogles this nurse and commands his people to capture her so she can be his wife, after which the nurse's fiancé runs up and Charlos shoots him. In our version, we skip the ogling parts and Charlos merely commands his goons to send the woman to jail for inconveniencing him. When the fiancé runs up, we will change Charlos's gun to a beanbag gun and give it an orange tip. We'll make sure someone says as much and make the man groan a little more so it just sounds like he got punched in the gut instead of shot. And we'll remove all that blood, per usual. The rest of the scene can stay mostly the same when Bonnie tackles Zolo, and we'll make sure she says that the fake blood is actually pizza sauce. Next, after Zolo carries the injured fiancé to the hospital, we'll change the context of the doctor checking the man for a collar to just him checking over his injuries, to which Zolo will tell him to hurry up. Next up is Luffy and Hachi in the human shop. The first thing we'll do is remove the price tags from each of the enclosures and change the context to being a temporary holding jail for prisoners on their way to an actual prison, as if these are people who got on the Celestial Dragon's bad side. Of course, Luffy and Hachi are there because they're looking for Kami, who is kidnapped. As weird as it is, kidnapping isn't really a taboo thing in Western media. Just think about old Western serials, or even something like Super Mario. So the kidnapping angle is fine to stay, but we really need to change the reason she got kidnapped. Out of anything in this whole project, even future arcs, I made sure to go back and check after completing the script, the auction house was the most difficult thing to adapt. Unfortunately, Sabody is so important, and the auction house is so important to the plot of Sabody, it can't just be skipped either. I honestly had to think about this for a couple of days until a good idea hit me. For this one, I'm leaning way hard into the 4-kid wackiness, but I'm actually really excited to unveil this one. Let's start with Kami. In the original, she got kidnapped off-screen after some foreshadowing. That will stay the same in our version, but instead of being kidnapped because she's a mermaid who would fetch a high price at the auction house, she will instead be thrown into prison by a bounty hunter because she was overheard criticizing a celestial dragon, St. Charlos specifically. In previous scenes, we'll have her drop lines about him being creepy, ugly, despicable, and other true observations. So when the Straw Hats learn that Kami was grabbed, they still immediately understand why, and figure someone must have overheard all their conversations, and because she was an easy target. Next, the auction house itself. Get ready for this. Instead of a human auction, this event will instead be turned into a game show. I told you it was going to be insane, but I think the way I approach it will require minimal changes to what is on screen, as well as fit in with the 4Kids ethos. It'll make a lot more sense once I explain it. So here's how the game actually works. It'll be called something like Bounty Board, and will be similar to a mix between The Price is Right and the party board game Wits and Wagers. The host has collected a variety of recently captured criminals, and one will be let out at a time as part of the game, who will be referred to as the prisoner. Every member of the audience is a player in the game and are known as contestants. When the game begins, the host will dramatically give a retelling of the prisoner's crimes, after which the contestants can begin playing. The objective of the game is to guess what the prisoner's bounty is in berries without going over, but contestants don't play one at a time. Anyone can call out a guess at any time, but all subsequent guesses must be higher than the last one. Also at any time, if a contestant gets outguessed, that contestant with the previous highest guess, and only that contestant, can call bust on the most recent guess if they think the most recent guess is higher than the prisoner's actual bounty, which ends the round, after which the true bounty is revealed. The round also ends if long enough time passes and no contestant calls bust or provides a higher guess. So, what do contestants stand to win from this? Well, if the highest guess ends up being under the true bounty, whoever gave that guess wins money equal to their guess. If a contestant calls bust on the highest guess, and that guess ends up being higher than the true bounty, the contestant that called bust wins money equal to the true bounty. On the other hand, if a contestant calls bust and the most recent guess is lower than the true bounty, not only does the guesser win the money, but the contestant who calls bust has to pay the winner money equal to the true bounty as well. This disincentivizes people from calling bust just to end the round. If the round ends and the highest guess is over the true bounty, they also lose and have to pay the host. The last and most pertinent game rule is this: if the winner's guess is under the true bounty amount, then the prisoner is also released following the game. In the story, After being brought up to speed about the existence of the game by Hachi, the Straw Hats race to the game show to try and win in order to free Kami. If this sounds convoluted, it isn't actually that complex. There's essentially 4 outcomes to the game, 2 of which result in the prisoner being freed. Additionally, while I fleshed out the rules of the game, the actual rules aren't that important in the context of a viewer just watching the show. All the audience needs to know is that the Straw Hats plan on playing the game to try and win Kami's freedom. So that's how it'll continue. The contestants in the audience will play the game and guess until Kami comes out in her fishbowl as the next prisoner. A quick side note, it's not important, I just wanted to comment on something that happens here. I am very aware that Toei censored lots of things from the original manga, mostly violence related. However, it befuddles me a little bit that Toei was okay with portraying violence, slavery, and reasonably sexual depictions of characters, but they weren't okay with showing Law flipping the bird. Like I said, it isn't that important, but this honestly feels like a 4Kids edit to me. Anyway, moving on. You may be wondering how my game show idea will function in the context of the famous 500 million berry bid that St. Charlos gives when he sees Kami in the original. Well, think back to the 4 outcomes I mentioned previously. While these 4 are the typical results based on regular gameplay and contestants playing to win, given that they're risking some amount of money if they guess too high, there's actually a 5th possible outcome. What would happen if the very first player gives a guess so absurdly high that no other contestant gives another guess? Well, that's exactly what happens. After Kami comes out and the Straw Hats are hyping themselves up to win the game, the host begins telling about Kami's crimes and shares Kami's feelings towards the Celestial Dragons. In this case, her crime was bad-mouthing them, specifically St. Charlos. This revelation makes Charlos so mad that he doesn't want her to go free under any circumstance and doesn't care about losing the game to make sure that happens. So, just as the game begins, he exclaims, 500 million, I guess 500 million, which leaves the crowd in shock. What options do the other contestants have? If someone guesses higher, St. Charlos will surely call bust on them, which not only means that Kami won't go free since her bounty isn't 500 million, but they will have to pay the 500 million to St. Charlos, which no one else in the room would likely have the money for. Also, since Charlos was the very first guesser, no other contestant has the right to call bust on his guess, because he didn't outguess anyone else. This puts the Straw Hats in the exact same situation as the original, being unable to win Kami back through the rules of the game/auction. That all goes out the window once Luffy starts throwing punches and Rayleigh comes in, but that should do it to cover the censorship here. I find this an interesting and satisfying change to fit 4Kids, but let me know what you think. The rest of the scene can go similarly from there, possibly putting less emphasis on Luffy's notorious punch into St. Charlos' face, but the rest should be fine. That goes for the rest of Sabody as well. By this point in the story, it's clear that Kuma doesn't kill people by hitting them with his paw, but sends them flying somewhere far away. We'll double down on that here by making sure somebody, maybe Sentomaru, says as much and make sure that Luffy also understands this. So instead of being distraught that he couldn't save any of his friends from dying, as far as he knew, he's just distraught that he couldn't save them, and that means he might never see them again, if they couldn't find each other. That's the end of Sabody, one of the more daunting challenges for this project, but I think I handled it well enough. I hope the changes I made were pleasing to you all and that it ended up satisfying the anticipation of this video. But clearly that's not the end. I've still got several more arcs to get through before this video is finished. So, without delaying, let's talk about... To be frank, Amazon Lily is the type of arc that might just be harder to realistically adapt for 4Kids than something like Sabody. Instead of the challenge coming from theoretical obstacles like the original script and unadaptable concepts like slavery, the challenge comes from the screen being filled with mostly naked women for the entire arc. If 4Kids was really still adapting One Piece, I'm almost inclined to think they'd skip the entire arc and just cut from where Luffy was flying through the sky to him running into Boa off-screen on her ship as she's on the way to Impel Down. But for the purposes of this video, what would be the fun in that? Just like every other arc, I'm going to do my best to give ideas no matter how unrealistic adapting the arc might be. The first change is innocuous enough. We can't show Luffy eating the big hog that he kills at the beginning of the arc. The first arc-specific changes will begin once the warriors of Amazon Lily find Luffy passed out covered in mushrooms. In the original, they mistake Luffy for a woman since they aren't accustomed to seeing men and don't know much about them, which leads to some comedic moments, such as them mistaking Luffy's schlong for a mushroom during the bath scene, and asking Luffy about his family jewels. I find it most appropriate to skip the bath scene entirely and cut directly to Luffy in the prison once they figure out that he isn't a woman. Luffy is also naked in this scene, so I think we should edit some bandages on him to make it look like he's wearing some clothing at least, and cut out the parts where you see his butt. This is also a good opportunity to talk about how we can edit the women of Amazon Lily to be dressed a little bit more appropriately for 4Kids audience. While not all their designs are super showy, many of them are. We can amend this by having them wear crop tops at least, which can be accomplished simply by recoloring, which should probably include Boa Hancock herself. The good news is that we won't have to do this for every character since many of them are in the background and not very detailed. During the chase scene once Luffy escapes, we'll cut the scene where Luffy bounces off Aphalandra's chest. During the cutaway scene where Boa talks to Vice Admiral Momonga, we'll remove the blood from Momonga's sword and not show the part of the scene where he cuts through the Sea King to remove gore. It's also at this part where I totally forgot how much of a general asshole Boa is during a large part of this arc. Like, she kicks a cat for no reason at all, and she's really rude and manipulative to her subjects generally. During this part of the scene, Momonga stabs himself to distract from Boa's beauty in order to counteract her love mellow. We need to censor this to remove the self-harm, so we'll edit out the knife and just say he pinched himself instead. I think we can retain the fact that Boa's powers only work on people who find her beautiful, since we can do it in a way that isn't so suggestive by changing parts of the script. The next big issue is the scene where Luffy falls through the palace roof into the room where Boa's taking a bath. We can leave in all the lead up to this, but remove all the scenes of Boa in the bath entirely. Instead, we show the scene of Luffy falling through the roof, then cut directly to Boa getting ready to use love mellow on him, implying that Luffy is somewhere he shouldn't be, while removing all the suggestive content. You would be right to recognize that this removes the important plot detail where Luffy sees Boa's tattoo on her back, but some legwork we've already done and some changes later will fix that omission here. Next is Luffy's battle with Sandersonia and Marigold. Pretty much everything for the fighting portion of this fight is good to stay, although I'd suggest we erase some lines to draw attention away from snake boobs. The important part comes when Sandersonia's shirt gets damaged and she exposes her tattoo while she's hanging over the spikes. In the original, Luffy knows how important it is and he knows that the sisters don't want anyone to know that they have that tattoo, so he uses his body to cover Sandersonia while Hancock stops the fight. In our version, this will stay the same, except that Luffy has a slightly different knowledge about the context of the tattoos. Recall that previously we had Hachi explain to Luffy that the tattoos were given to criminals and that they'd be in trouble if anyone in public saw it. Well, Luffy isn't fighting because he wants to hurt the Gorgon sisters, or anyone on Amazon Lily for that matter. And for as much trouble as they've caused him, and the innocent women who were trying to reason with Hancock on his behalf, he doesn't want to embarrass them either. So, although he doesn't know exactly why the sisters might not want their subjects to see the tattoo, he does know that it would be trouble if anyone saw. So, he jumps in to protect them nonetheless. The final scene that will require some significant changes is the scene where Hancock strips to show Luffy her own tattoo willingly, to explain its significance. We obviously can't show that on 4Kids, but again, we also can't cut out the scene entirely for continuity reasons. What we can do is greatly shorten it by removing the scenes of Boa removing her clothes, then only show the scenes where Boa is shown above the shoulders or in the background, which should make it easy to recolor a shirt on her, since she's mostly covered up by her hair and her pet snake anyway. That's it for Amazon Lily, but I also want to talk about a few brief changes that we should make to the interludes where we're shown what the other Straw Hats are up to after they got launched by Kuma. For Nami and Witheria, all we need to do is remove the shower scene. For Robin, we'll actually need a few changes on Tequila Wolf. First off is that we can't use the word tequila since it's an alcohol reference. It's revealed later in One Piece that there's multiple giant bridge projects similar to Tequila Wolf going on around the world, and that they're all named after some type of alcohol. Well, you know how 4Piece changed most of the scenes where people are drinking wine or alcohol to juice? I thought it would be funny if we changed the names of these projects to name them after types of grapes. So, Tequila Wolf will be changed to Concord Wolf in our version. In my observation, Tequila Wolf gives me really concentration camp kind of vibes, which makes sense in the original since they're using forced labor. We can't rightfully say that everyone in Concord Wolf are prisoners, since many of them are women and children, so we'll just say that they're from a nearby kingdom and that the world government just came in and forced them to start building the bridge. I'm not sure what we can do about the overall really dreary theme, but a start would be to remove the Tequila Wolf officer's whip and change it to handcuffs. Also, downplay the violence and recolor the guns, like usual. For Sanji in the Kamabaka Kingdom, we'll need to make some slight changes, which will sort of foreshadow how I'll be handling Emporio Ivankov on level 5.5 of Impel Down. I see no reason to change the name of Kamabaka Kingdom, but I will be making a significant change to its residents. In the original, the Kamabaka residents are mostly or all men who, as they say, have embraced who they truly are and exhibit many feminine qualities, including dressing like women. When Sanji arrives, and while he's a little delirious, they think that he's there because he wants to join them, so encourage him to embrace who he truly is and become like them, which it would be an understatement to say Sanji is put off by. Instead of this being men with feminine traits, we'll change the residents to being women with a lot of masculine traits. I think we can do this in a way that isn't particularly offensive or derogatory. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that Sanji is still put off by these very manly women, and this also shouldn't conflict with Sanji's moral code because, to my memory, he isn't shown actually fighting any of them, just running away. Nothing needs to change with Frankie nor Zoro, but of all the Straw Hats, Brook probably presents the greatest challenge. In the original, a group of cultists are hailing Satan and trying to summon him to help their kingdom. Instead, Brook flies in, who they mistake for the devil and begin worshipping him and beseeching him for his powers. The scene is also very culty with the robes and the candles and the summoning circle on the floor. Let's see what we can do with this, and honestly it may be one of the goofier changes I've made to this point. First, remove the summoning circle completely, for obvious reasons. Next, we recontextualize what the cultists are doing. Instead of being cultists, we'll just make them soldiers of some kind who are gathering to plan a plot to fight against the Long-Arm tribe that recently came in and ransacked their kingdom. Instead of bowing and chanting, they will merely be doing a group exercise to get ready for their next mission. When Brook flies in, they will believe that he is a phantom of their old king, who will be implied to have been killed when the Long-Arm tribe came in. The rest of the scene can continue from there with that context. And of course, we will change the ending where Brook asked to see the woman's underwear to asking for a kiss, and then all the soldiers will also offer to kiss him as well, thinking that he is the reincarnation of their beloved king. That marks the end of Amazon Lily and these interludes. The next couple arcs will be a whirlwind of changes, and, as I have continued to allude to, contain most of the content that many people have wondered about how 4Kids would address once they got to that point. Hopefully I won't disappoint. The next arc we'll be tackling is... Based on comments from the last video, this arc was also very anticipated. I think it'll be interesting adaptation-wise for all the varied content in Impel Down, including another one of the tougher adaptation decisions, which is Emporio Ivankov, but we'll get to that when we get to it. One of the main decisions we'll be making right away is to tone down the intensity of the arc. By that, I mean, in the original, Impel Down is a very brutal and hopeless location. Yes, it is a prison, which are known for being a horrible place in their own right, but Impel Down especially is a hellhole where prisoners are subject to forced labor, torture, and abysmal living conditions, to say the least. Some notable features include a lake of boiling blood, a desert with sand made from the remains of dead humans, a winter forest infested with wolves, and a labyrinth where jailer beasts patrol corridors for escaped prisoners. The arc opens up with a sampling of what's to come, and we'll have to skip the scene of prisoners being tortured and the scene with the skulls. We can also skip the Buggy and Ace flashbacks, honestly, since we skipped them before, and we don't really need them in order to believe that Buggy actually met Ace. Next, we'll skip the scene where the prisoners are shown bleeding from the spike needle grass. I haven't said much yet, but that covers a lot of the opening of Impel Down. By this time, Luffy and Buggy are well on their way to descending the levels of the prison. However, most of what I said entails just removing violence and torture, which there is a fair bit of in this arc, so it's easy to see that a few sweeping changes could cut down drastically on the runtime. Soon after this, we're introduced to Warden Magellan, who is definitely my favorite character that got introduced in this arc. I wouldn't say that he is underutilized in the story, since he really has no business being outside of Impel Down, but I think he and his power are very cool and underrated. Speaking of the Venom fruit, while you might think that being inflicted with a deadly poison might be too visceral for 4Kids, recall that in my last video, the plot point revolving around Don Krieg's gas bomb was left in the story, and that Gin is shown suffering from the poison gas's effects. So, 4Kids were obviously fine with this sort of attack. I speculate that it's because you can't really see the damage that's being done from an external perspective, but the reason why it doesn't really matter. That said, Magellan's venom will remain pretty much unchanged in 4-Piece. Something I admit is somewhat inconsistent in my adaptation so far have been the decision to keep some flashbacks and cut out others. I said previously that I like keeping some for characters or plot points that we haven't seen in a while, whilst cutting ones that only serve to fill time or aren't extremely relevant. When we run into Mr. 3 in Impel Down, the original shows a flashback to when the Straw Hats fought against him while he was a member of Baroque Works. The issue is that his main fight occurred on Little Garden, which was obviously cut. No big deal, we just omit the flashback. Luffy can't remember anyone anyway. Jinbei is introduced next. We'll skip the part where the jailer beast hits him with a spiked club and the part where he makes his own palm bleed while clenching his fist. Also around this part, we'll skip showing Miss Golden Week when Mr. 3 alludes to her, since we never see Miss Golden Week in 4Kids, who is also in Little Garden. Sorry if I'm going kinda fast here. Nothing so far has warranted any really interesting changes. It's more skip this, cut that, yada yada. Even so, I find the specific instances that we have to cut to be sometimes pretty interesting, especially when they allude to prior cut material. I'm knocking on wood, but hopefully nothing I'm cutting out turns out to be really important later down the line. Anyway, around this time, Garp is getting an update from Sengoku about the situation with Ace and what's going on in Impel Down. I can't recall if this was ever directly referenced in 4Kids, but Garp's signature snack is green tea and rice crackers. To keep him in line with 4Kids, changing some non-American foods, we'll change the rice crackers into graham crackers instead. Speaking of food, when the trio makes it to starvation hell, a bird falls out of the sky and cooks completely through due to the heat, which Luffy then eats. As funny as it sounds, I'm on the fence about whether to include this. You wouldn't show a cow being butchered for hamburgers on a kids show, but the bird getting instantly cooked might just be so comical that it's fine to stay. On that note, each of the floors of Impel Down has a different name with hell at the end of each of them. We'll just change this to starvation floor, burning heat floor, and so on. We'll also remove the reference to the sand on starvation floor being the remains of dead prisoners who starved to death and turned to dust, plus remove showing this prisoner strung up on poles. I'm electing to change Saldeth's name to Saldine just to remove the word death. Another Impel Down manager we get introduced to is Mistress Sadie, who has a dominatrix kind of aesthetic. Let's cover her up a bit by giving her a shirt under her regular outfit. We also now see the burning heat floor here, where it's mentioned a few times that this stuff below is boiling blood. That's an awful lot of blood. Is there a blood fruit user here somewhere, or am I to believe this many prisoners were bled out to create this thing? At any rate, we'll just call it lava since it doesn't look much different and not show people falling into it. Whew, that covers about half the arc before we get to New Kama Land. It's here that I want to briefly discuss Bon Clay and some naming conventions. We were originally introduced to Mr. 2, aka Bon Clay Bentham, all the way back in Alabasta when he was a member of Baroque Works. In the original manga, Bon's fighting style is called the Okama way, or Okama Kempo. In Japanese, one of the meanings of Okama is a man who cross-dresses or has feminine mannerisms. I don't know the exact reason, but I think it's well known that the English manga changed this in translation. Instead of translating the word or just saying Okama, Bon instead says, "Oh come my way," whatever that means. The English manga really doesn't go back on any of its translation choices. As I mentioned, to this day Zoro is still called Zolo in the official manga, and, you guessed it, in the English manga, in Impel Down, Bon still says, "Oh come my way." What's really interesting is that although the English version makes Bon's personality much more overt, and they even use the word queer to describe him and others in the Kamabaka Kingdom, he also still says "Oh come my way" instead of Okama.
When you're queer, you never fear. No, never fear. Oh, come my way.
This is something I didn't cover in my last video when I briefly brought up Bon Clay in the 4Kids adaptation. So, did they also use "Oh Come My Way," and did they copy it from the official English manga? Well, back at the time, the official English manga was lagging far behind the original Japanese. In 2006, when 4Kids stopped adapting One Piece, the English manga was only on volume 8, which wasn't even out of the East Blue yet, so 4Kids wasn't taking any cues from them. The official English translation of Alabasta wouldn't be released until 2009. So, how did 4Kids adapt the Okama way? Well, they just did a whole 180 and called it Crazy Karate.
You're no match for my discombobulating crazy karate.
This is a small aside, but 4Kids also made Bon Clay a chef in 4 Piece.
Just the coincidence of you meeting your culinary match. And as a chef, I'll warn you now that you're all going to be French fried.
Which I only assume they did to make him serve as a foil to Sanji. I also already mentioned in the last video that Bon has a Creole accent and makes French cuisine references. Anyway, Crazy Karate is what we're working with here. In 4Kids, they base a large part of a character's adapted personality on their initial appearance alone, so Bon makes a bunch of swan references and Sanji tells him to stop putting on an act like he's a stage performer. Those are the personality traits I'll be keeping and focusing on in my adaptation. Bon just really likes ballet and treats life like a performance. Bon Clay is the GOAT though. I remember the scene in the manga where he's fighting off wolves to protect the poisoned Luffy to be really brutal. I think Toei censored the violence significantly from the manga. So now, the moment in Impel Down we've all been waiting for. Emporio Ivankov and New Kama Land. In addition to being a leader in the Revolutionary Army and one of the centerpieces in my favorite One Piece TCG deck, Ivankov is known as the Queen of the Kamabaka Kingdom. He's also known as the Miracle Worker, someone who Bon Clay has heard legends of and looks up to. I'm not sure what kids' programming really looks like these days, but I'm pretty sure that the themes of queerness and sex changes wouldn't fly in the 2010s. While 4Kids could easily remove the aspects of Bon Clay's personality that they found to be unadaptable, the visual content on screen surrounding Ivankov makes a simple script change unrealistic. I mean, look at this outfit. Now for the changes. Instead of referring to him as a queen, we'll just call Ivankov the leader of the Kamabaka Kingdom. We'll also need to do a fair amount of editing to change his look. Let's remove the fishnets and color his lower body to make it look like he's wearing more of a normal athletic leotard. He's a major character and is on screen quite a lot in this arc and the next, but it'll have to be done. As for tonal changes, I think Ivankov, especially when he's in New Kama Land, sort of reminds me of a health guru from a 1980s VHS workout tape. And when he's using his hormone fruit powers, he also kind of reminds me of that Botox scene from My Wife and Kids. That's a deep cut. Does anyone remember that show?
Bing!
I think the hormone fruit has too many connotations that 4Kids wouldn't be big on, so we'll change the name of his power to the body fruit, but leave the abilities of the fruit pretty much unchanged. In our version, Ivankov will be a sort of health guru that helps people discover their true selves and helps them to look the way they want. His own character design reminds me of someone who's had a bunch of facial plastic surgery. Just look at those cheekbones. That, along with the script changes to reflect this new sort of idea, I think will be enough to get Iva to a level that 4Kids would be satisfied with. Really, his personality doesn't need to change that much. There are more omissions. We are going to leave out the scene where Ivankov changes the attacker into a woman, since he won't be showing that power in our version, and because the attacker is topless. This also brings up the matter that Ivankov changes himself into a woman in various scenes. We will be completely removing these. It happens in 3 instances by my count. First, in New Kama Land itself, briefly, which we can just skip over really with no consequences. A second time happens during Ivankov's fight with Magellan and against Sadie. We'll have to just skip these. The fights are arguably of some importance, but not really important to Luffy's story, and the plot doesn't really change if we see these fights. It happens a third time after Marineford, but I'll get to that later. We next find out that Ivankov treated Luffy with his powers, who is now enduring the treatment while chained to a table behind a huge door. In the original, Luffy can be heard screaming in pain constantly, and I think that sort of torturous treatment is a little too visceral. Instead, we'll cut portions of the flashback scene to omit Luffy screaming so much and have Iva explain that Luffy is resting in the care of a few other prisoners. He's alive, but they aren't sure how long it'll take for him to recover from the poison or the treatment. We will also be removing the detail that the hormone treatment will shorten Luffy's life by 10 years. During the scene where Luffy eventually emerges, in the original, we see a pool of blood come out from under the chained door. We'll remove the blood and change the script so that instead of everyone reacting to the fact that Luffy stopped screaming and the possibility that he's dead, they're just reacting because they heard the chains snap and they're in disbelief that Luffy would even be able to stand up so soon after his injuries. It's at this point that we move out of New Kama Land and go into the escape sequence. We see Ivankov using Deathwink, which we'll change the name of to remove the word death. Instead, the name will be Hyperlash, like as in eyelashes. We'll remove the scene of Iva turning the guard into a woman as well. Lastly comes the second Luffy vs. Magellan fight. At the end of the fight, Magellan uses his move called Hell's Judgment, which will be changed to Venom Judgment. Anticlimax? That's the end of Impel Down, and I got all my bigger discussion out of the way throughout the arc. I hope the changes I made here were also interesting enough, although as I said, most of them boil down to just removing a whole bunch of stuff. Those are the kinds of changes that would really suck to have to make since it's not really interesting, just removing content, but those were some of the interesting things. We aren't quite to Marineford yet. Here at the tail end of the arc, we see more catch-up episodes for the rest of the Straw Hats. None of these really need to be changed except for Brooks, where we will again need to omit scenes where people are showing him their underwear.
Is our underwear not good enough anymore?
The other is Sanji. In his catch-up episode, he's still seen running from the residents of the Kamabaka Kingdom, where they eventually catch him while he's exhausted and make him fight against the stand-in queen, who dresses him up all girly, and the scenes get a little weird. As much as I hate skipping any Sanji content, I don't think there's enough content we can leave in here, perhaps with the exception of the beginning where they catch up to him. We can instead simply imply that nothing of note happens until Ivankov eventually comes back into the picture later. Okay, it's time to pause for a little meta discussion. Back before I even released the first video, I expected to be able to readapt the whole series in 2 episodes. Looking back, that was just far too unrealistic. The level of detail I've tried to maintain means that there's still hours of content if I want to cover it all, which I eventually still plan to do, but for the sake of general 4Kids One Piece discussion, I wanted to catch my breath. As I said in the prior video, this project spawned after I heard lots of content creators pose the question, what would 4Kids have done if they had to adapt some of the future material? The most common points I believe people bring up in relation to this question are, number 1, Laboon's omission and its consequences for Brook, number 2, the cutting of Dory and Broggy and its implications in Enies Lobby, and number 3, the deaths of Whitebeard and Ace, one of which I covered in the last video, another of which I covered earlier in this video, and the last of which I will be covering shortly in the next arc. When I'm finished with that, the story will continue after the time skip in the New World, which is sort of like a new beginning for the story, in a way. Even with so much of the story left, I feel like after I cover Marineford, I'll have answered the main burning question that inspired me to begin this project. In addition to being a good midpoint, I think I should reiterate my purpose for doing this in the first place, in case you didn't watch the first video. This 4-piece readaptation is meant to be a thought exercise to answer a question I've heard a lot of people put forward, even if no one was really asking for an answer, and even though very few people actually take the 4Kids One Piece dubs seriously. I thought it was worth some consideration, both as a curiosity and to shine some light on a part of One Piece history that is often maligned. I again want to say that 4Kids One Piece adaptation isn't my preferred way to experience One Piece. I think it has a lot of flaws. I understand that no one really asked for this, but hey, it's fun to think about, and it's been fun to talk about. I'm not taking it that seriously, and you shouldn't either. The people who commented on my first video something like, if 4Kids adapted the rest, it would suck. There, I saved you a lot of time. I think they really missed the point. And I'm certainly not concerned with people who don't get what I'm doing. Hell, I expected 90% of the response to my first video to be negative. I was gobsmacked by the number of people who actually enjoyed it. With that said, it's time for the big one. The main climax that marks the end of the first half of One Piece's story. It's time to talk about the Summit War, Marine Headquarters, aka... Crunchyroll technically considers everything from arriving at Sabody until the return to Sabody as the Summit War saga. But the relevant content for my adaptation begins on episode 452, where the ship of Impel Down escapees is headed to Marine HQ, or I guess Navy HQ in this version. Here's something that's been mentioned several times before this point that I haven't addressed yet, and that's the execution of Ace. Luffy learns of Ace's planned execution while he's on Amazon Lily, and his motivation for going to Impel Down was to break Ace out. But now that Luffy failed to reach him in time, he's got to go to Marineford to stop the execution. The obvious question we come to, before getting anywhere near the actual Summit War, is how are we going to treat the idea of Ace being executed in 4-piece? Let's recall that in the original 4-piece, there have already been a few allusions to execution that 4Kids did adapt. If you'll remember back, Buggy almost executed Luffy by cutting his head off after catching him in a stockade in Rogue Town, and 4Kids adapted that just fine. Let's pay attention to the wording they used.
Well, I don't see how you're going to wear the crown without a head!
Additionally, as I referenced before, at the beginning of each 4-piece episode, the announcer says about Roger that, before they hung him from the gallows, these were his final words he said. It's kind of interesting how all the adaptations of One Piece slightly changed the way that Roger was executed. In the manga, while not showing it, the text box says that the Marines lopped off his head. The anime also doesn't show it, but implies that they stabbed him with 2 big spears. The live action actually goes further, showing Roger actually dying by being impaled with spears. Side note, I was kind of dumbfounded that they actually showed Roger die in the live action. It sort of reframes this event in that adaptation from being, the final moments of this legendary man, an event that went down in history, always spoken of but never seen by the generation of today, to just, wow, that happened, darn. That isn't a dig at the live action, but this isn't a video about the live action, so I'll stop there. And I suppose in 4-piece, they just hung him from a rope. To be honest, I'm kind of surprised that they directly reference his death in this way. It was a judicial killing, but hung him from the gallows? At the beginning of every episode?
Before they hung him from the gallows, these were the final words he said.
Was that just considered less violent than any other means of execution? Either way, there's no gallows in sight when we see Ace's execution platform, and I think it would be pretty distasteful to edit a noose into those scenes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My point is that it's perfectly acceptable to threaten that the Navy is going to execute Ace, whatever method they end up using. Just a little later, we see Garp and Sengoku talking about the execution and the ensuing conflict that's going to happen because of it. However, this is where my changes start to get hinted at. For now, we'll just ensure that we have Sengoku say to Garp, "You know this isn't just a normal execution." The implication is that the Navy has something else in mind, and the execution could just be a pretense to draw out Whitebeard, but we'll get to that later. Speaking of the Navy, let's talk about something a few commenters brought up, and that's the three admirals' epithets. Each of them essentially have two names. There's their real names, Borsellino, Sakazuki, and Kuzan, and then there's their admiral epithets, or nicknames / codenames, however you want to put it, which are Kizaru, Akainu, and Aokiji, which translated mean yellow monkey, red dog, and blue pheasant, respectively. So, in our version, there's the question of whether to just call them by their real names, use their translated epithets, use the Japanese epithets, or some combination of these. I think the best approach is to use their names and translated epithets interchangeably, which I'm slightly changing to be less of a mouthful in English, so the updated epithets will be yellow chimp, red dog, and bluebird. There's another minor subject I wanted to cover relating to Navy ranks in 4-Piece. As I mentioned in the last video, this Garp card from the original One Piece collectible card game portrays Garp as a Navy Lieutenant General instead of the Vice Admiral rank that he holds in the English manga / anime. I thought that it was kind of weird that 4Kids went to the trouble of changing Marines to Navy in their adaptation, but then they used an Army rank for Garp here. But this was just in the card game. What did they do in 4-Piece? Well, they skipped it. Yeah, the mini-arc that was originally portrayed on cover stories in the original manga was adapted in the anime and takes place in between when the Straw Hats leave Whiskey Peak and when they first arrive at Little Garden. So not only did 4Kids skip Little Garden, they also left out Garp, which means that the first time 4-Piece viewers would ever see Garp would not be until the end of Enies Lobby, which I covered in the last video. What's more interesting is that I looked it up, and Oda appears to actually use ranks in the Japanese Imperial Army for the Navy ranks in the original Japanese, not Navy ranks, which means that the English translators made the decision to use Admiral, Vice Admiral, etc. So this Garp card is a weird, full circle type of moment. But that change raises the question, because I'm considering the card game 4-Piece canon, should we also change the names of the 3 admirals to the 3 generals? My decision is, yes, we will change them. That doesn't cause any continuity issues since Captain is still an Army rank, and Smoker is referred to as a Captain in 4-Piece. Anyway, a bit later, Sengoku reveals to the Marines stationed at Marineford that Ace is in fact the son of Gold Roger, as Sengoku does not refer to the D initial. This then goes into a sequence where we see Ace's mother, Portgaz D. Rouge, who Sengoku explains carries Ace for a term of 20 months before giving birth to him because the Marines were looking for Roger's potential son on the island where she lived. It's a sort of extensive side story that I don't think 4Kids would want to fully adapt, so we'll cut out most of the parts beside the part where Rouge asks Garp to take care of Ace. In the original, Rouge is implied to have died after her ordeal of carrying Ace, but in 4Kids, we'll leave that a little more ambiguous and have her say that Garp should take him because she trusts him to keep Ace safe from the Navy, who will be looking for Roger's son. Lastly, in the original, Sengoku makes a declaration that the Marines' only reasonable option is to execute Ace, even if it means the prospect of a war with Whitebeard. In my adaptation, this will be a little different to allude to the big change I'm making for Ace's execution. Instead, Sengoku will say, "We know if you were to go free, you'd use your flame powers to become the next Pirate King, so our only option is to take that power from you, even if it means incurring the wrath of Whitebeard." Another quick aside, but I noticed an interesting comparison while I was watching this portion of the anime. I'm not sure if this was strictly intentional, and I usually don't like to read allusions or themes that don't exist into a text, but the anime appears to make an allusion to the story of Moses from the Bible on a few different occasions. The search for the woman who is bearing Roger's son mirrors the hunt that the Egyptians undertook to eliminate all male children from the Israelite population, and in an upcoming scene, Buggy standing at the helm of his ship commanding the gates of justice to open appears to allude to Moses parting the Red Sea. If it was just one, I would call it a coincidence, but 2 times seems intentional, and I wonder if anyone else has had the same thought. This is about the time where the Whitebeard fleet comes in and the Moby Dick comes out from under the water. Soon after, we get a flashback of Marshal D. Teach murdering Thatch to take the Dark fruit. We'll remove the scenes where we see Teach's bloody knife and have Ace and Whitebeard dialogue expose that Teach pushed Thatch overboard and stole the fruit instead. Here's when the battle begins proper.
Think I'll have you light the candles for my next birthday, you magma punk.
Whitebeard gets off some lines, then Oars rushes in and gets struck down. We'll skip any scene that shows Oars getting his leg cut off, and after this, we'll also edit around the scene where Sakazuki kills the Marine soldier for cowardice. The Impel Down ship carrying Luffy, Ivankov, Crocodile, and the others lands around this time, and Ivankov starts fighting Kuma, not realizing at first that Kuma has now been totally converted into a cyborg with no more sense of his old self. During this fight, Kuma analyzes Ivankov and we see Iva appear as a woman while looking through Kuma's eyes. We'll skip that part but leave in everything else. Now, I'll finally reveal my big plan for changing Ace's death scene, the groundwork for which will primarily be laid out during Squard's betrayal. If you don't recall, in the original, Sakazuki isolates Squard and puts him up to killing Whitebeard by surprise, after Sakazuki reveals that Ace is Roger's son and lies about Whitebeard making a secret deal with the Marines that he would trade the lives of all the Whitebeard allies for the safety of Ace and his own main crew. He then offers Squard a new deal. He will allow the Whitebeard allies to escape if Squard attacks Whitebeard and allows Ace to be executed. In our version, the circumstances will mainly be the same, with a few changes/additions. Sakazuki will still reveal that Ace is Roger's son and lie about the Navy making a deal with Whitebeard to protect Ace. However, Sakazuki's deal to Squard will be a little different. He will reveal that the Navy's real goal is to use a secret technique to extinguish Ace's cursed fruit power, then create an opening to capture Whitebeard. You see, it's a known fact that some devil fruits are directly superior to others. This is true in the original story. However, what is different in my version is that Sakazuki will reveal to Squard that a superior cursed fruit user can extinguish the abilities of a user with an inferior fruit, robbing them of their power and leaving them with just the curse. Since Sakazuki's magma fruit is the superior version of Ace's flame fruit, he can do this to Ace. The Navy intends to do this live via transponder snail and construe it as a message that the Navy has the power to rob any cursed fruit user of their powers, which would demoralize pirates around the whole world. Sakazuki then gives Squard a staff embedded with Sea Prism Stone to use on Whitebeard. Sakazuki wants Squard to wait until they draw at Whitebeard into a vulnerable position, then surprise attack him with the staff so that the Navy can move in and capture him. That's the plan, at least, which Squard accepts, but then realizes that he doesn't have the heart to go through with it. Instead, Squard immediately boards the Moby Dick, then hits Whitebeard with the special staff, which will be edited in place of the sword that Squard uses in the original. Squard is angry with Whitebeard. He feels betrayed both because Whitebeard hid Ace's identity from him, and because he believed Sakazuki's lie about the deal. Even so, Squard doesn't have the heart to betray his adopted father. He hits Whitebeard to make a point, then gives himself up to Whitebeard since he doesn't have the will to go on anymore. The rest stays mainly the same, except that we'll downplay all the Whitebeard pirates' reactions since the blow Squard dealt to Whitebeard isn't that serious in this adaptation. So that's one of the big hurdles cleared. You'll see how I handle the rest with Ace soon enough. Next is when Luffy makes his first break towards the execution platform. Cut the impact frames of Kizaru hitting Luffy in the face, and also cut the scene where Sengoku gives the execution order since, again, that's not plan A of what the Navy is after here. As for an explanation of why Sakazuki doesn't just do it already, they have to debilitate Whitebeard first, and Sakazuki is keeping busy with defending Marine HQ right now. We next see some flashbacks of Ace's childhood. We'll cut this scene that shows some guy with a cigarette, and we'll also slightly be reframing the trauma that Ace experiences from his belief that his life is a mistake. Hey, I know that a lot of people dog on Garp for not helping his grandchildren very much, but there's that scene where Ace asks Garp if him being born was a mistake, and Garp is just like, maybe, I don't know. Like, good job, that's going to encourage Ace to be a Marine. This scene will be changed in my version as well. Instead, Ace will ask Garp, "Do you think that I will grow up to be like my father?" For context, Ace has been asking around Goa Kingdom about, hypothetically, if Roger had a son, what would you think of him? And while a lot of pirates look up to Roger as an aspirational figure, the public at large in the One Piece world views Roger with infamy and thinks very low of him, so they tell Ace that Roger's son wouldn't be worth anything, they should kill him just like they killed his dad. So then, in my version, the sentiment that people will communicate to Ace is that Roger's son would grow up to be just like his father. In the original, from how I understand it, Ace resents his father Goldie Roger because he feels like his entire existence was a crime and he felt like he shouldn't even exist. That sentiment is worsened and reinforced by the general attitude of people towards him that makes him feel unwanted. Similarly, in my adaptation, Ace's main trouble is that he wants to separate himself from Roger's image because he feels constrained, like his choices don't matter, and that he'll grow up to be hated like Roger was. Ironically, what Ace wants is freedom, and he finds that freedom by becoming a pirate, just like his father. Ace cries as he's touched that everyone found out the truth about who his father was and still wants to save him. Whitebeard really gets in the battle after this. He pukes up some blood, which we'll remove, and he gets stabbed a lot, which we'll edit to make the Navy guys' swords look longer, like they just missed him with their attacks. Also around this time, Whitebeard communicates to his crew that he intends to die here rescuing Ace, which we could change to him communicating that he'll stay behind if it means getting everyone else out safely. Since I haven't mentioned it already, we will be editing out all the damage that Whitebeard sustains in this fight to remove the significant blood and scars on his chest. Next comes the decisive moment when Ace is freed by... Have I been saying Ace this whole time? It's supposed to be Trace. Whoops, I gotta edit the script.
This is awful!
Next comes the decisive moment when Trace is freed by Luffy. Right before this, in the original, Sengoku gives another execution order to kill Trace. In addition, in this adaptation, Sengoku will say, "This is taking too long, Sakazuki is busy, we'll just execute him now the old-fashioned way." Though, because of Luffy's Conqueror's Haki, this doesn't work out. We will rename Trace's attack Fire Gun to Flame Rockets in order to remove the word gun. But, as you know, it wasn't meant to be. We'll have Sakazuki taunt Trace while insulting Whitebeard, make a break to attack Luffy, and Trace jumps in front to block the attack. In this version, we will edit the scene so that instead of Sakazuki punching straight through Trace, Sakazuki wraps his lava fist around Trace's midsection, grabbing him. After letting go, we edit out the hole in Trace's chest, then Sakazuki reiterates what he told Squard, saying, "There, now it's done. Just as some cursed fruits have specific weaknesses, a stronger power can absorb a directly inferior power and rob someone of their cursed fruit abilities, leaving them with no power and just the curse. Now that I've burned out your power, I can finish the job." Yeah, Sakazuki is a little bloodthirsty, and he wants to finish off Trace even though it goes against the Navy's intentions. He gets stopped by Jinbei, so that doesn't go anywhere. I'll note that Borsalino fires a lot of light beams into people, notably Marco, so we will need to edit out those scenes so that when the character actually takes damage, it looks like they just get hit with a beam, we can't show it go straight through them. After Sakazuki successfully defeats Trace, Garp jumps up and Sengoku stops him. We'll change Garp's dialogue slightly to have him say, "Keep holding me back, Sengoku. If you don't, I'll make sure Sakazuki won't be returning to service." A lot more dialogue needs to be changed here to reflect the fact that Trace isn't dead, but is now powerless. When speaking to Luffy, Trace will say, "I'm sorry. It seems like I can't be much help to you anymore. I can't even help myself." When the doctor runs over, he says, "I'm sorry. This isn't something medicine can fix." This Trace change does bring up a few valid issues that you may be thinking of already, so I'll try to address those. This is the part where Luffy breaks down and has his spirit completely broken. If Trace isn't dead, you'd think that Luffy would at least do everything he can to help him get to safety, right? Well, we can use the excuse of Ivankov's energy hormone here. By the way, we'll change the name of that to Energy Shot. Luffy has taken 2 doses of Ivankov's boost here, so we'll make sure it was communicated that it doesn't just give you energy, it steals energy from your future self. So Luffy is now experiencing the after effects of those 2 doses of energy. A lot happens right after this, so we will reuse some footage of Ivankov to have him react and say that Luffy's treatment caught up with him and he's being knocked unconscious because he is full out of energy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's refocus on Trace. Does his trauma and his feelings about himself still hold up in my version? I won't answer that until a little later, but I'll say this now. Trace can still be conflicted about his life, but instead of believing that it was wrong of him to even be born, his issues stem from the fact he was put down for being connected to Roger. He will say to Luffy, "I didn't ask to be the son of the Pirate King." And instead of asking himself, "Did I deserve to be born?" he asks, "Did I deserve to be loved?" Lastly, after saying, "Thank you for loving me," he will also say, "I'm too tired to move. I hope I can make it off this battlefield." It'll be much easier to edit around this if we mostly cut the wide shots and focus on close-ups so it doesn't show the hole in his chest as much, which will otherwise need to be edited out. That's one big part of Marineford taken care of, and I'll dwell on it some more later, but for now, it's time to move on. The next few episodes focus on Whitebeard fighting Sakazuki and Blackbeard. We will change the name of Sakazuki's attack Hellhound into Redhound. When Blackbeard reveals himself and his new crew members are introduced, Vasco's shot with the Glug Glug fruit is a little problem, so I will be making the ridiculous decision to change his epithet from heavy drinker to milk drinker, implying that he likes to drink milk instead of alcohol. Vasco's shot gets basically no screen time in the whole series. We don't even really know what his powers do, so that doesn't have any consequences yet. From the other side of the crevasse, Marco comes in, and in our version, we'll have him state that he grabbed Trace and flew him to safety on a ship, which will explain why we don't see him again later. During the short fight with Blackbeard, we'll need to edit out some of the blood when Whitebeard slashes him. Now we come to the other big event at Marineford, the death of Whitebeard, which will obviously need to be changed. I looked for a way to foreshadow my intentions for this, but I honestly couldn't find a good opportunity, so forgive me if it feels a little abrupt. When Whitebeard goes in for the finish on Teach, Teach shouts, "Guys, I need you to back me up. Get ready with those sleeping bullets." And you might see where this is going. During the scene where the Blackbeard crew gangs up on Whitebeard, let's cut some of the parts where a few people like Shiryu and Devon add in some slashes, just to make it a little tamer and more consistent that the Whitebeard pirates are trying to put him to sleep, not kill him. After the assault, Shiryu says, "Don't worry, boss. Those sleeping powder rounds we nabbed from Impel Down will have him out like a light in no time. Then you can move on with your plan." When Whitebeard speaks again, Teach goes, "What? Why didn't it work?" Whitebeard gives his speech, then begins snoring. After which Teach says, "Zay ha ha ha, so that powder put him to sleep after all." Instead of having the Roger flashback happen before Whitebeard's speech, we'll leave it for this part. While showing some close-ups of Whitebeard, he can give some dialogue as if he's talking to himself, realizing that he's falling asleep. He'll say, "It's a poor time to doze off. It's times like these that my mind always goes back to that day." It'll then go into the flashback as if Whitebeard is dreaming about it. We'll cut the extensive scenes of everyone crying since Whitebeard isn't dead in our version. Teach says, "I can't believe it, but he's asleep standing straight on his feet." Then Marco and Vista have a short conversation. "You and I can stay here to make sure we get Pops back on the ship before the Navy captures him." Then we cut away before it shows them running away as well. We'll also cut the scene of Vista talking to Jinbei that follows this scene since the conversation is no longer relevant in the context of these changes. When the prisoners are goading Buggy to do something, he makes the excuse that it would be dishonorable to attack a sleeping enemy, which the men love him for. After Teach moves in and pulls off his trick, the Navy and the Whitebeard pirates are stunned, because although it was a little-known secret that a cursed fruit power could be eradicated, no one thought it was possible for an ability to be stolen from someone. So this is an instance of Teach sort of one-upping the Navy. While Sakazuki is pursuing Luffy, who is being carried by Jinbei, in the original, he punches a hole through Jinbei to hit Luffy. We will instead make it look like he missed his punch. Next, we'll cut the scene in episode 488 where all the pirates are getting shot while running away, and also cut the scene where Kobe finds the locket on the dead Marine. The polar tang surfaces here, and we'll need to remove the word death from the side of the ship. And at this point, there's not really anything more to change before Shanks and the red-haired pirates arrive. We will remove the scene of the red-haired pirates retrieving Trace and Whitebeard's bodies, for obvious reason, but that's really it. That was a long arc. I fear that a lot of the changes I made just sounded like a list, again, but there was just a big volume of things that 4Kids would need to edit out in order to keep the series appropriate for their audience. I hope that I was able to keep it entertaining the whole way through. But I'm not done just yet. There's still the entire childhood flashback and some wrap-up from Marineford until the arc officially concludes, and this will be the last section of the video. It was way too ambitious of me to think I could do the whole rest of the series in one video, so I hope you'll accept me stopping here for now. But let's get back to it. In episode 491, Luffy is having flashbacks to the battle. We should cut some of the wide shots to lessen the drama and change his dialogue to say something like, "It isn't fair," and he asks Jinbei, "Trace got his powers stolen, didn't he?" Now the flashback begins. We need to remove Dadan's cigarette throughout the whole thing. I think a lollipop would be acceptable, just a random thought. A large portion of the beginning flashback won't need any changes, so let's skip to the part where the Blue Jam pirates get involved. After Porshami captures Luffy, he is surprisingly brutal with him in the original, beating Luffy with a pair of spiked gloves while he hangs from a rope. We need to remove any scenes where he hits Luffy while he's tied up. I don't think it would be acceptable to show a grown man beating down a little kid like this, even if we remove the spikes and the blood. We can keep the scenes where they're just talking to make it look like Porshami is just keeping him captured and starving him or something. After the escape, we'll need to remove the very end of the scene where Blue Jam comes in to remove him killing Porshami. Quick change, we will need to remove the scene where Sabu's mom slaps him as well. We will change the sake cup so that they're drinking milk instead. It honestly even looks like milk in the original. We will also cut the bath scene from episode 497, and whoa, was all this stuff with the tiger in the original? Of all the parts that Toei could have added filler to, they chose to do it here, during an emotional-filled flashback sequence? Whatever. We could skip over this or leave it, it really doesn't matter. Blue Jam is getting a new blue pistol. Regularly, recolored guns are okay, but we will cut the part where Blue Jam tries shooting at Trace while he's stepping on him. As for Sabo's ship being blown up, although he is just a child here, I think this might be okay. Recall my rant about Igaram from the first video? I think if a death/disappearance is ambiguous, it can stay. We can cut the scenes of the Celestial Dragons gloating after it happens though, and then that's the end of the flashback. The case of the scene in current-day Windmill Village is interesting. On one hand, Dadan doesn't have as big a reason to be upset since Trace isn't dead in our version, but it is a good follow-up after the flashback to see how the village is handling it, so I think I would decide to keep this part. Now here's maybe the most important part to put a bow on these changes in Marineford. In this scene, Marco and Shanks appear before the graves of Trace and Whitebeard. How could we leave this in if they aren't really dead in this version? Well, the conversation would go something like this. Marco: it's a touching send-off to their lives as pirates, but why the fake gravestones? Shanks: it's better that the world thinks that they're gone. That way, they can live the rest of their days in peace. I'm running on empty at this point in the script, so I'll speed through the last couple changes before the time skip. First, we remove the crosses and cross imagery from Muggy Kingdom. Next, when Brook writes music, we'll have the cultists think that they're just magic songs before Brook informs them that they're just ordinary songs. And lastly, we need to skip the parts of the Sanji catch-up where Ivankov is a woman, which is really just when he returns on the ship. The scene will just open when they're talking to each other at the port. I also think that this line is really ironic given the Sanji smoker censorship.
Is there anything I can do for you, Candy Boy?
I have kind of written myself into a slight corner with Sanji here, since I have reframed all the newcomers as women instead of men, so it would be a little awkward for Sanji to have to fight all of them for the recipes of aggression, so we'll instead make it so that Sanji has to beat each of the Grandmasters in a cooking competition. He'll say something like, "I'll learn those recipes, and I'll do it without hitting a single lady." Well, yeah, I don't know if I'm too good at outros yet, but that's the video. Thank you for watching. I have a few more things to say about this one, so if you're interested in a few quick updates on the future of my channel, be sure to stick around until afterwards. It's impossible for me to not continually be reminded of how cheesy and ridiculous the concept for this project is. I'm still genuinely surprised at how many people were interested and really engaged with me and the others in my comments. But if all of you are willing to play along, I'm happy to share my ideas with you. It's been really fun. As I mentioned earlier, I plan on taking a break from this project to work on a few other ideas I've had for videos. The last thing I want to do is get burned out on marathoning another several hundred episodes and make a video that isn't really up to par, so I'll be taking a little break before returning to this idea, but I will definitely be returning to this, don't worry. As for what else I plan on doing on this channel, you'll have to wait and see, but I have a lot of other hobbies and a lot of interests and a lot of stuff I'd like to talk about. That includes not just anime, but also video games, film, and even books, so if you enjoy hearing my thoughts on stuff, be sure to stick around. I will give you one spoiler. The next video will be about a video game, one of my favorites from the original PlayStation, and I'll be talking about how I think it is essentially a perfect sequel to its first game. More on that to come. As far as timing, I can't really promise any kind of consistent upload schedule. I'll likely be able to get a new video out every few months or so. I kinda did drag my feet on getting this one out, sorry again, and I do have a full-time career, but this is super fun, so I won't be going anywhere for long. That's all I've got to say for now. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. I'll be hearing from you.